All right, so we're ready to move on to our next topic. Mark, can you turn on your video and start sharing? So we're going to talk about Connect to Change, Unlocking the Value of Systems Thinking in the Built Environment by Mark Inzer. Mark is a keen champion of outcomes-focused systems thinking, collaborative delivery models, digitalization, connecting digital twins, and circular economy in the built environment. He's a Royal Academy of Engineering visiting professor in the digitalization of the built environment at Cambridge. He's a visiting professor at the Department of Civil and Environmental Engineering at Imperial College in London. As a Mott MacDonald Fellow, Mark provides advice to key clients on digitalization and broader industry transformation. Previously, Mark was the CTO of Mott MacDonald and director of the Center for Digital Built Britain, where he was the head of National Digital Twin Program. Obviously highly qualified and experienced in the subject he brings to us today. So Mark, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you very much, Gary. It's a great pleasure to be here. Gary, do you mind leaving your video on so that I've got a human face to talk to?
Oh, sure. I'll be glad.
Yeah, because I hate just talking to my screen. It's tough.
Terrible. It's really hard.
Yeah. So thank you very much. It's wonderful to be here, and having been involved a little bit before with you, I know what a fantastic community this is. You're a really thoughtful community. So what I'd like to do is bring to you this idea of co-creating a shared understanding about systems thinking in the built environment. So I think that's going to take quite a bit of unpacking, and I thought that the way I would do it is back to front. So what I'll do is start with where we're going to end up. And then work out how we get back to it. And where I hope we end up is in a place where we can see that it is time to see the built environment differently. So no longer as a series of construction projects, but as a system of systems that has a real purpose. And that purpose should be to enable people and nature to flourish together for generations. So it's just seeing it from a completely different angle. And then I think we should note that this isn't just a nice little theory. It's not just like tickling our brains with a different way of seeing things, but it's an absolute necessity because the kind of challenges that we face now demand joined up solutions. We can't do it the way we've been doing things before. We need to be more joined up. And what we've been doing in co-creating a shared understanding, hopefully, is making a way forwards, a shared way forwards, so that we can apply systems thinking in the built environment. So that's where I hope to get back to. And effectively, what we will therefore be doing is looking at what needs to be done, why we have to do it, and how we might move forwards. So I hope that will make sense. Let's start that journey. So when it comes to co-creating this shared understanding, we use something that we call the gobstopper model. Now, I realize that this might not travel well because it might be using some very English language for a very English thing, which doesn't translate well into American. And so over here, we call them sweets rather than candies, and you probably don't even have a gobstopper. But basically, it's a disgusting candy, which is a big ball of sugar. And it's layers and layers of sugar. And then on the inside, it's got a little kind of a sesame seed or something. And you suck it forever and it never goes away. So the reason for picking on a gobstopper model is that we did it the other way around. We start in the center with a very small number of people who know what they're talking about, and query them, ask them what they think about systems thinking in the built environment, so we can get something down on paper. And then once we've got something down on paper, we can share it with a wider group and say, what do you think of that? Does it make sense? Does it kind of float your boat? Have you got anything to add to it or anything you want to change? So then we can change it and take it to a wider group of people. And so effectively, we've been doing this now for nearly 2 years. We've involved about 200 people. At the beginning, it was just one-to-one interviews. Then we went to workshops. We've had workshops with all sorts of different people from across government and industry and academia and investors, so that we get many different angles on the same thing. Each time knocking it into shape, but adding another layer of sugar until we get to this place that we are now, where we have written it all down. We've launched it. And we're in a place where we think we can move forwards from just theorizing into some proper action. So you can download it here if you're interested. We called it Connect to Change. We spent a long time to make it short. And I think it's attributable to Mark Twain, this whole thing where you say, I'm sorry I wrote you a long letter. I didn't have time to write you a short one. So we spent a long time to write a really short paper. It took about 5 months to get it from 50 pages down to 8 pages. But I hope you will appreciate that effort, because now we think it's really short, really sweet, and it just says the stuff it needs to say, and no more. So do have a look at that. But what I'll do is unpack a bit of it as we share just now. What it comes down to as a way forwards is that we think we need to coalesce and connect communities of action, because there's loads of people who have a part to play in this, and, all the way through from government, industry, academia. Client organizations have a huge amount to play because they're always leaders in this space. What the client wants, the supply chain lines up and delivers. So clients are key. But also we've got systems expert communities, people who have been practicing in this area for 70 years. Maybe not them, but their forefathers. But, there's institutions with institutional knowledge about systems thinking that we can bring to the built environment that has been proven in other sectors. We just need to bring it. And so there's this idea of coalescing these communities which are probably in front of us anyway, but with a little bit of input energy, become communities, can work together. And then important to make connections between the communities. But the thing that connects them in so many ways is this shared understanding. It's having some kind of consensus, a shared way forwards, so that we pull in the same direction. There's always a danger, isn't there, that if you're trying to get something done and everybody pulls in different directions, like everyone's keen and they all pull, but they pull in different directions, you go nowhere. So what we have to do is pull in the same kind of direction. And so we need this shared understanding, a framework for action. And then when it comes to driving change, we kind of need to know what we're doing. We need to have some connected, coherent actions and recommendations that we can drive through to success. But as always in this kind of space, you can't just kind of do something and hope it will work. You've got to learn on the way. And so this idea of learning by doing and progressing by sharing kind of feeds back into this approach. And so we have come up with recommendations. We've come up with 9 recommendations in that paper I shared. They're neatly connected, as you would hope, so that one recommendation kind of leads into another. They're coherent because they all fit together. And then we've got this intention, I hope it's there, I think it is, where the whole is more than the sum of the parts. So when we run through all of these recommendations and they connect together, you get more than just 9 things being done because they connect. And what kicks it off, the thing that starts it all off, is getting going on this network, this coalescing and connecting of communities, but also something that we called a review, a built environment systems review. And the idea of that is for us to provide solid economic evidence of the value of systems thinking in the built environment. Because what we tend to do, and I'll come on to this in just a bit, what we tend to do is kind of focus on the construction bit, rather than what are we actually trying to achieve from our overall built environment. And we don't have the metrics to back it up. We don't know how our built environment is performing. So we don't know how we get better outcomes from the built environment. We're very good, I think, on metrics around projects and project delivery. We could, of course, be better. And you will have heard a lot about that, and you will hear more today, I am sure. But beyond projects, into the operation, the maintenance and the use of the systems, our metrics are kind of rubbish. So we need to get going on that. And even to get the first step in getting going, we need to know that it makes sense. There needs to be an economic and business case so that we can start those steps. Okay, so I've done the kind of what are we doing, where are we going kind of thing, but I've got to justify it now. So we're taking that step back and now we're doing the why. Why is this important? Why do we have to do this just now? And let me start by just kind of defining what we mean by the built environment, because the built environment is amazing. And I think quite often we don't notice it because it's hiding in plain sight. We live inside it, but we utterly depend on it. If the built environment doesn't work, then society doesn't work. This thing matters. And we can see it built up in layers, can't we? Economic infrastructure, energy, transport, water, waste, telecoms, those kind of things, each one of which is complex and interconnected. but they're connected to each other. Transport is complex enough on its own, but it doesn't work unless energy's working. Energy doesn't work unless telecoms is working. So you get the picture: complex, interconnected, and interdependent. And it's getting more that way. The more we digitalize, the more complex that's becoming, and the more there's this risk of cascade failures. One thing fails and it flows all the way through. That's not the end of the story, because we've got our social and urban infrastructure, all the buildings. The buildings don't make sense unless they're connected into the economic infrastructure. This is a connected story. And then, of course, there's a connection into the natural environment, which always happens. The built environment always lives inside the natural environment. And sometimes the natural environment lives inside the built environment. They're connected. And as we move towards nature-based solutions, we look towards nature to protect cities from flooding, this kind of thing will matter even more. You add it all up and you get the built environment. Like I've said, it's amazing, complex, interconnected. And what I would suggest is, and not everyone likes this language, I accept that, but just as a matter of fact, the built environment is a system of systems. I've just spent about 5 minutes justifying that. So it is a system of systems, but that's not how we run it. The way so often it's run is in these silos, which kind of go from top to bottom through government departments and regulators through into the client organizations within sectors. And I think if we're being honest with ourselves, we're not really good at working across those silos. We haven't cracked how to make that cross-sector collaboration work. But we need to, because the built environment is connected. But also, I think an even bigger reason why we need to is because the challenges that we face are connected. We do realize that climate change is real. You just look at the news. It's happening. This stuff is happening. But it's not only that. If we look at all sorts of other connected challenges, whether we're trying to achieve energy security or provide some kind of climate resilience, or any kind of resilience for that matter, or if we're moving towards some kind of infrastructure equity or circular economy, these things, every single one on this list here is a connected challenge that demands a connected solution. In other words, we can't solve connected challenges in silos. If we have a hope of addressing these things, we got to get better joined up. So if I could just summarize where I think that takes us, we've got this really connected challenges, really connected systems. However, the way that we run it is in siloed organizations. And even if those siloed organizations got their act together and were better at working across the silo boundaries, they couldn't do the job they need to do because they don't have the data. The data also is in silos. We haven't worked out yet how to get that kind of interoperability that means we can get those connected solutions I talked about. And in the built environment, because it is so long-lived, because it can last for hundreds of years, and we're benefiting from what was done a few hundred years back, what it means is that the built environment demands an approach which is strategic and long-term and joined up. And the thing is, that's not how it is at the moment. So we have to do something different. This is my problem page, but you'll be glad to know the next page is a solution page. If that's what the problem is, then the solution surely is that we get better joined up. And so if we bring systems thinking to the built environment, we can address these things. These are not impossible challenges. We can handle this. We've got the capability. So what it means is that we have to advance systems thinking in the built environment. But what I would suggest is that's not enough, because if we just think nicely and nice joined up thinking, it's not going to get it there. We also have to change some of the systems, because some of the systems lock us in to behaviors and approaches that basically drive the wrong answer. So we've got to change the system too. The benefit of this, like the prize at the end of it all, the promise of it, is that by applying these systems approaches, we can achieve better outcomes, which use fewer resources, and they work in more lasting ways. So what's not to like about that? We kind of need this. And so we have to bring all of these amazing systems approaches to the built environment. They exist already. I've said that. There's lots of different systems tribes that can bring lots of different useful bits. The system science people, the systems dynamics people, the cybernetics people, each of them have different useful things. What would be really useful, I think, is if they could be kind of a bit more coherent for us, because in the built environment, all we want to do is benefit from the good stuff that they have. We don't need to kind of enter into arguing between whether one is better than the other. All we need is the useful stuff. Give us the useful tools, the useful approaches, because we're ready for it. We need it now in the built environment. But the good news is it's all there. It's been proven. We don't have to invent it from scratch. All we have to do is just port it across and start applying it. I think we do need a vision, though, because if we're going to do this systems thinking, systems thinking at its heart has got a lot of purpose. The system is quite often defined by its purpose. And so I think we do need to see the built environment as having a purpose. We need to know what that North Star is. What are we pulling towards? And I've already said that I think that what we're aiming for is better outcomes for people and nature. People can't flourish if nature isn't flourishing. So we need better outcomes for both. And you'll notice here that I haven't said anything about construction. Construction is super important. I'm not denigrating it in any way. I'm just saying that where the real value is in the use of the built environment and in delivering the outcomes for people and nature. And of course, construction fits into that. So let's see where it fits. I'll just be really quick on this. It's kind of saying, if we've got this systems view, we start on the right-hand side of the page. We start with where we're trying to get to, start with the outcomes. The Sustainable Development Goals are pretty good. Humanity's come together and said, let's do this. We're not going to hit there by 2030, but it's still a good thing to aim for. We kind of need the outcomes we aim for to be aligned from kind of global through national, regional, local. Because if the local outcomes don't align with what we want to achieve at a bigger level, we don't achieve it. Then we've got to understand how the systems deliver the outcomes. And we're working here with built and natural systems in order to give a better outcomes for people and nature. There's quite a nice little duality there. And I think it's quite instructive to notice that the connection between systems and outcomes are the services that the systems provide. Because we don't so much want the systems themselves, do we? What we want is the benefit from the system. In other words, the service it provides. And so what we're trying to do is improve those services, which could be from the built environment, like mobility. It provides us with warmth and shelter and security, all those kind of things. Those are services. So useful, I think, to see the built environment as a service. But we could also see the natural environment in similar terms and talk about ecosystem services, providing the clean water and air, etc. And then in the built environment, we have all these processes, the levers that we can pull in order to improve the performance of the system, to improve the services, to get the better outcomes. But there we have it. There we have, I think, the whole picture. And we can see where construction fits into that. It means that the whole picture isn't construction. Construction is part of the picture. It's a very important part. But I think in order to get the outcomes we want, then we need to see the bigger picture. With a project-based view, I think what we tend to do is kind of start with planning and think it ends with handover. But what we know, don't we, nowadays, is that you can almost never get a fully greenfield site. You're always starting from something. You're always handing over into something. And then we notice that the thing you start with and the thing you're handing over to are the same thing. So then you can fold it over and you get the infinity loop that I've previously shown. I think that the systems thinking is really valuable even inside a project. And I guess we will have heard a lot of this by the end of the day. So what I'm saying is systems thinking is useful across the whole piece, in projects, but also beyond projects. In projects, what we tend to do is break it into its component parts, let each part tick each of those boxes, say the job is done, but it's not, because what we have to do is see how all the parts come together into something that works. And so this is the systems V, isn't it? This is applying systems engineering in a project. This is the stuff that we know we have to do. However, it's not a big enough picture. I think if we've got this systems-based view, then we see that we actually have to apply the big picture holistic thinking to the whole thing, not just to projects. And in doing this, I think it's quite useful to see that there's different systems we have to understand. There's the physical systems, of our trains and our track and our signaling, but also the organizational systems that very often are where the blockers are. And then increasingly, we're seeing informational systems are becoming real. So let me just touch on that very briefly. As we see that digital worlds are actually real, then the connection between the digital and physical world is where we can make better decisions faster, so that we can understand the physical world better using our digital models. But then, importantly, we can start to connect those models up, can't we? We can federate them and get a better understanding of the whole system. And so I think that we have to become masters of the digital worlds just as much as we aim to become masters of the physical world. Okay, so I'm nearly there. I just want to touch on, how do we apply this systems thinking in the built environment? If we like the basic idea, you're going to say, so how do we do it? Well, I think we start on the right. We start by defining our outcomes. We kind of recognize that the outcomes that we're currently getting from the current systems are not the outcomes we want. So we've got a delta between the outcomes we're currently getting, the outcomes we want, and that delta in outcomes should drive all the rest of the actions. It should drive us to understand the systems, because if we can't understand the system, we can't get those better outcomes. And that's always about connections. It's not just understanding the components or the elements, but the connections between them and how one interfaces with another. And then always recognizing that whichever system we look at, there's always a bigger system. So there's going to be an interface coming from the outside, which then means we can design our interventions better. What we tend to do, I think, as an industry, is we focus on the triangle. We get straight on with doing something and let's go and build a thing without working out what's it trying to achieve, number one, and how do we achieve it, number two. And then we should hopefully understand where the leverage points are, where we can get the most bang for our buck, where we put the intervention to get the most outcome per dollar, which surely is what we should aim for. And then the end of the story, I think, is never the end, because we have to observe, learn and repeat. Because you can never have one intervention that kind of flows through and solves all your problems, particularly because the systems we're talking about are complex systems. So you do something, you get unintended outcomes. What we have to do is observe, learn from what happens so that we can intervene more effectively the following time. So observe, learn, repeat is really key. We can overlay on this a very familiar theory of change. You're probably aware of these kind of words. In our interventions, our projects, basically we need to understand the input, the resources, the time, etc. But all that produces is an output. And then we recognize that the output hopefully will have an impact on the system, and the system will deliver the outcome. But the point of me putting this here is really to make the distinction between the output of the project and the outcome from the system. And what we really want is the outcome. So why don't we set ourselves the objective function of maximizing outcomes per dollar rather than maximizing output per dollar? And we can apply this at any level. We can apply this thinking, just around transport, or we can put it around, rail, or take it up a level, look at any particular individual sector, or take it up another level, and look at a city. What I'm basically saying is that with this really simple model, you can put whatever you like inside the circle, and it still kind of makes sense. You can even put the planet inside it. And what we should be doing, I think, is applying this systems thinking across sectors, not just in sectors. So wouldn't it be nice if you could have reliable Wi-Fi on trains? Wouldn't it be nice if we had a real genuine connection between energy and transport, because they're connected now. The more electric vehicles are moving around, the more kind of moving batteries they should be counted as part of the energy system, so we can manage supply and demand both of energy resources and transport resources in the same kind of breath. And then data centers, data centers are never just data centers, are they? Because they need to have all the energy and the water, and what do you do with the heat? And so we need to be able to think and work across sectors. So here we go. We got back to where we started. It's time that we saw the built environment differently, not just as a series of construction projects, but as a system of systems which has a real purpose to enable people and nature to flourish together. And we've got to get on with this, guys. We've got to do this now. So I hope you like that. I hope I haven't put you all off, but I'm ready for some questions now.
Doesn't help to talk and leave myself on mute. Got a question for you. Where did this view of project management as isolated from the wider environment metasystem and focused on outputs come from, and why did it happen? Having started my project life in the process industry, the description Mark gives strikes me as a feature of the built environment, construction sector rather than generic. Thoughts?
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? I mean, I suspect that part of the reason for that is ease of measurement. It's much easier to measure outputs, and you can hold people to account for that. And you can take people to court for it, and all these kind of things. It's much easier to measure. I think by the time we get into trying to measure the performance of whole systems, and definitely by the time we try to get into measuring and understanding outcomes, it just becomes harder. And so I suspect that part of the reason why we've got ourselves here is because we've followed the thing of what's easy to measure rather than what's important to manage.
Good response. Another question for you. Who is going to moderate this process? Who could/should lead this? Government?
I think that there's a lot that government can do, because government is in a great place to kind of sit above sectors and to make connections. But I think quite often the expectations that we put on government is different from that. And so very often government won't do this kind of stuff that we're talking about off its own bat. But that's the system that we have created for ourselves, isn't it? It's part of the political system, it's part of the democratic system. It's just how we've got ourselves. So I think that it can't just be government by itself. I also think it can't be just industry by itself, because industry needs to be unlocked. We sometimes work in shackles which have been created for us by decades of practice. And so industry can't do it by itself either. And academia can't do it by itself. So I'm kind of saying that none of these bodies, these domains can do it by itself. However, I do think that when we work together, we can start to unlock something pretty special. So to my mind, the route forwards is one of collaboration across those major domains. I think that this needs to be government, industry, academia, actually working together to try and get the best outcomes.
Yeah, that's a good point. Is how do you get started? I do see, Mark, a very clear picture. It doesn't have to be, I guess everything is the built environment, but I could see a company wanting to develop. I'm an oil and gas guy, okay? Wanting to develop oil or gas deposit in a country could use this. Start with the desired outcome, and get alignment amongst all the participants or stakeholders on that outcome before getting started. And if you bring government, national oil company, the partners in the project, could be key suppliers, could be contractors, could be various people that are going to have an impact on that investment, and get aligned on an outcome, could save a lot of trouble down the road, because it's the outcome that matters, not the output. I think that's just really brilliant.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you, Gary. I really do agree. And it's like starting from working out, what do we actually want to achieve?
Yeah.
Getting around that table and saying, look, what are we actually trying to achieve here? Because if we can be clear on that, then we can work out how to get there. I mean, this is one of the amazing things about our industry, isn't it? I mean, it is brilliant. We can do amazing things. But I think if we don't spend the time thinking about what are we trying to achieve, then we can be brilliant in doing the wrong thing. We need to be brilliant in doing the right thing that gets to the outcome that we want.
Yeah. So another question for you. Do you view the challenges as bigger on advancing the enabling technology or aligning incentives across stakeholders in these systems of systems?
I'm not sure I've completely followed the question, but I'll answer it anyway. I'll answer what I think. I'll answer what I think, and then the questioner can come back if they like, if I've missed the point. And apologies. I think that in this space that we're talking about, where there are some connected things and some disconnected things, connected systems, connected challenges, disconnected organizations, and disconnected information, I think that probably the biggest area of difficulty, the most difficult one to shift, is the organizational one. It's to do with culture and behavior, because it's to do with humans, isn't it? And that's us, and we are difficult. So I think that's where the hardest challenge is. I also believe that we're fundamentally we want to do some good stuff. We want to make a better outcome. The vast majority of people want to get to a better place. So I think that this idea of starting with what are we trying to achieve, where are we trying to get to, can be a really great aligner. You can get people together around the table to say, yeah, we want to get to the same place too, rather than kind of fighting about the inputs. You should agree on the outcomes, because then we can pull together. So my suggested answer to the question, I think it is the difficulty is with the humans, but we can do that. I am sure we can.
Very good point. Hopefully, Dan, that answered your question. If not, ping me here. I'd say, this goes right back to what Keith and James were talking about. How do you define the energy system that green hydrogen is trying to address? And what are the outcomes? What are the desired outcomes? Really a lot to think about here. And where you draw how do you get your head around where to draw? Since everything's connected to everything, where do you draw the circle?
Yeah, that is a super question, and I think I understand that question. So we'll go with that one. So I think, Gary, that's like one of the most important starting points. Is like, where are you drawing the boundary? And I already said that I think that you can apply this thinking, just around a transport system or around the whole planet. So like, where do you start? And I think that the simple answer to that is just draw an arbitrary line. Just start. Because what so often happens in these things, I think, is the best way of getting started is to start. Rather than agonizing over what's exactly perfectly correct, is just do something. Just draw the line and work out what's inside, what we think is outside. And as we progress, we will work out where the line should be and whether we should draw it a bit wider or a bit tighter. But I think what you can do is sort of say, for our scope of control, the thing that we have some kind of influence over, we can probably draw a line around that, and we can understand what outcomes relate to the system that we care about. And there might be bigger outcomes for a bigger system, but maybe that's for somebody else to do. So what I'm kind of saying is that I think the best way of getting started is just to draw an arbitrary line, work out what's in, work out what's out. And if we need to make the line bigger to include more things, maybe that means including more people to have the conversation. Yeah. But my kind of relaxed approach to this is just saying, start, just give it a go and see where it takes you.
Yeah. Well, that makes a lot of sense. Well, thank you very much for your time, Mark, and contribution to the conference today. Very much appreciated.
Thank you very much.